Everyone. We last left off with Jesus um, dying on the cross and being buried. Today we're going to talk about the Shroud of Turin, and it's a really exciting topic, and I can't wait to share it with you. Um, so Jesus is put in the tomb, and um, he is hastily buried, and because the women had to get home because it was Friday night was the Sabbath, and uh, and so they expected to come back on Sunday morning to take care of the body the right way. And soldiers had been posted, and there's huge, a huge boulder in front of the tomb. It was all sealed up, and everything was good. So Sunday morning, these women show up, and the soldiers are gone, and the rock is rolled away, and there's nobody in the tomb. The body is gone, and just these linens that are left there, the burial cloths. And they freak out and they go back and they go back to the apostles and are like, yo, you got to come check this out. So they run to the tomb, and here's where we have the resurrection account from the Gospel of John, where Simon Peter went into the tomb and he saw the linen cloths lying, and the cloth that had covered his head, not with the burial cloths, but rolled up in a separate place. And the other disciple went in, and he saw and he believed. Right? They knew that the body wasn't there, but why did seeing the cloths make them believe? Well, many people believe that the shroud of Turin, this long linen cloth that exists today, is the actual burial cloth of Jesus. And as you can kind of see up there, these are photo negative versions of it, but they have this distinct image of a human being. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to scientifically get to the bottom of it, or at least we're going to end with a theory. I'm the kind of person who, in science, you can't just leave me a whole lot of loose ends. You've got to at least give me a chance to come up with a theory of what happened. Um, that's how I work. So we'll move on and we'll learn a little bit about the shroud, and we'll 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 answer some questions. All right. So the Shroud of Turin is like 14 over 14 feet long, and 3.5 feet wide, and it's located in the Cathedral of St. John in Turin, Italy. That's why they call it the Shroud of Turin. It is a 3-in-1 herringbone pattern, linens, it's a technical term, and that was done in the first century. Scholars think that the man would have been around like 5'11", which would have been really tall. Most people would have been like 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", maybe. And here you've got a guy who's 5'11". So if this were Jesus in theory, he would have stood out in the crowd literally. There are three types of markings on the Shroud of Turin. There is that body image. There are scorches, that burn marks on the cloth, and there are also blood images. I'm gonna go back to the last image that we um, looked at. Well, this will work. See these triangular patches where there was we're going to talk about that in a minute, but here you see there's scorches that happened to the shroud in 1532. So the shroud was stored in this big silver box that they had stored in a church. And what happened was the this church got set on fire somehow, and they tried to get this silver box out, but it was too heavy, and so they had to leave it. And some of the molten silver melted, and it burned through the folded shroud. I'm actually pretty impressed that it didn't just burn all the way up, um, but just these patches. So you see these triangular patches where that molten silver had burned through the shroud. Um, there are lots of different other patches, on the shroud as well, but that's where the burn marks come from. Going back, the other part are the blood marks, and you can see those in the hair here. They're kind of bright, and here's on the original side. So this is the photo negative, off to that side, and then this side over here is the actual what the linen would look like. So this is the actual image here on the Shroud of Turin. So there are so when they look at like what is this image, how is this image, how is the coloration? We Scientists suggest, of course, it's rapid dehydration and oxidation, and a degradation of the linen in some way. There are a number of interesting markings on the shroud that I kind of want to just point out at this point. Large round wounds on the wrist, an upward gouge in the side in the thoracic cavity, small punctures along the forehead and scalp. You see those above. Um, Linear wounds on the torso and legs of the back, swelling on the face. This face is all puffed up as if it were beaten pretty badly, and streams of blood down on both sides. All of these match the descriptions of Jesus in the gospel for his what happened to him for his crucifixion. The gouge in the side where the spear would have been placed in to make sure that he was dead. Um, Also, the linear wounds on the torso and legs from the scourging where he was beaten, swelling on the face where he would have been beaten and punched repeatedly, and also the large wounds on the wrist. Now, what's important to understand with the wrist, we'll talk in a minute, is this is we typically refer to Jesus being many paintings throughout history. You have Jesus um, punctured through the hands when he's nailed to the cross. But this is not how Romans did this. A French physician in the 17th century did some experimentation on cadavers and found that the weight that the weight that being crucified through hand would not be able to sustain the weight of the body, and it would rip right through, but only through the mesocarpal region of the wrist. We talked about that last time. So here's the thing, though. In 1898, the Italian photographer Segundo Pia took a photograph of the shroud and realized that the negative had a distinct image, meaning that the shroud was actually the negative. And the image shown means that these things have perfect photonegativity, which is very rare. So we talked about the scorches. Another thing is when we look at what crucifixion was back in those days, crucifixion was torture, and it was meant to be the torture of the person, and people were left on the cross for multiple days. And so the key was not to kill them; it was to cause them pain. It was to have everybody else go ahead and um, be able to see them in pain. That was a difficult thing. Um, and then there is scourging, where they would tie somebody up and they would take a whip, and we'll see that in a minute, and whip them until an inch of their life. And this was again a type of torture. But what was never done was both, because if you scourged somebody and whipped them to an inch of their life, and then you went ahead and crucified them, then they wouldn't have lived, and it would have defeated the whole idea of crucifixion as a drawn out torture. But yet, in this particular image of this particular person, we see the evidence of both of these things, and would have been a very unique crucifixion to have somebody scourged and then crucified. Except that it does match with the gospel telling about Jesus and his crucifixion. Also, a spear was never used for crucifixion, and yet here we have the puncture of a spear on this particular person. That what they would have done would be to make sure that he was dead. They would have broken the legs, because as we described before, to be able to pull yourself up, you need to be able to push with your legs as well in order to breathe, and that just was not going to be able to happen. And also, you have this idea of a crown. The small puncture wounds on top of the head were very unique, but yet all of these things match up with the crucifixion of Jesus.